The Unbroken Place podcast with Eddie Paul Thomas is a production of Say Something Studios.
So I think for us to be successful in anything, we need to be self-aware. So I think taking the time to actually understand what lights you up, like what gives you energy, where are you best placed to add value to a team, an organization, to a relationship. I think everything starts with that self-awareness and taking the time to actually just almost getting to know yourself, right?
Welcome back to The Unbroken Place, where it begins and ends with empathy. I'm your host, Eddie Paul Thomas, and today we get to sit down with Elize Giese. Elize is a globally experienced business leader and executive coach who works at the intersection of strategy, leadership, and human performance. Our conversation today revolves around growing in leadership and relationships. So let's get into it. Thank you so much for joining us today, Elize. I'm really excited to have you on. We've worked together before with nonprofit Awaken Pittsburgh and just had some really good conversations. And I'm excited to have you here because we are talking about how to, serve our clients better. Both of us are coaches, but I'd love for you to take a second and tell people a little bit about your background and who you serve.
Thanks, Eddie. Yeah, it's been such a pleasure getting to know you. And I'm really excited for the conversation. So I guess kind of how I got to this place is always so interesting to think back to the decisions we make and how like we find ourselves where we are right now. So I'm originally from South Africa. My husband came home like 2.5 years ago saying, "Hey, do you want to move to Pittsburgh?" His company offered him a transfer. And so we just made the decision. I somehow knew that that was the right thing for our family. I was at that stage in a corporate role. So my background is engineering, and I worked primarily in banking for the majority of my career. And so giving up all of that made no sense to many people around me, but something just felt right. And when my husband spoke to me, I just said, "You know what? I think this would be an incredible opportunity for us. It'll be an adventure. It'll be great for our kids to experience different things." And I mean, in the work that you and I do, we always talk about getting out of your comfort zone and experiencing new things and learning new perspectives. And little did I know that that is what I was doing at that time. I just knew it was the right thing to do. And so we moved to Pittsburgh, and then I had to decide what I wanted to do. And to be honest, I actually at that moment felt like I was like starting afresh. It was this kind of carte blanche moment of, at least now what? You had this kind of long banking career and, all of that. And, you come into the US where people don't know the colleges you went to and the companies you worked for. And as much as they were really well respected there, like it's not known here. And it was actually such a fun experience for me personally to go, like I get to firstly almost like reestablish myself. And it was almost like a bit of a challenge for me going, "Hey, like what are you made of, right? Can you start all over again and basically build your reputation?" So now I do executive coaching. I work with business owners locally and internationally. And very much my work is around helping leaders grow and be better, and in turn, growing your business. And because my philosophy is that a business only grows as quickly as a leader is willing to grow. How much are you willing to stretch, to learn more, to take risks, to think differently? Because that affects decisions you make, and that affects your business. It affects every person in your team. It affects your clients. We all know about the ripple effect, right? All of those things stem from the leader and how they respond to different situations. So that's very much the work I do. I think very much from the experiences I've had in the past and how passionate I am about leadership and the impact that leaders
Yeah.
make. So I feel very privileged, and it's been a really exciting journey, but I learn every day, and I love the conversations I have with people and just helping them, do things that make them really happy and excited.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I love hearing it. It's very similar to my story in many ways, and completely different in others. Just in that, for me, working in nonprofit and corporate and ministry for a while, um, I found myself really working with a lot of different branches or departments within the organization. I would be brought in to lead a program, or I'd be brought in for marketing, and find myself in different conversations in different departments, and had the skills to kind of see the systems, if you will. How, again, that ripple effect that you were talking about, how
Mhm.
one thing that happens in this department has a reaction in others. And so as I got further and further in my career, I didn't want to just do one thing. It wasn't just, well, I just want to do marketing. Well, I just want to do operations. Well, no, that being a coach, being a consultant allowed me to kind of step back and see everything, and utilize all the tools in my toolbox to help people
Mhm.
get to where they want to go. And I agree with you. The leadership, when leaders are able to step confidently, and grow in different directions, it has this wonderful impact on organizations. And so I'm really excited to have you here, because some of the things that we're going to be talking about today are some of the common struggles that the people we
Mhm.
talk about, whether it be for profit, nonprofit, ministry, whatever business sector you're in. There's a lot of commonalities in the struggles
Yeah.
that some of these leaders and emerging leaders go through.
Hmm. So interestingly, part of what I do is one-on-one coaching, but I also lead these kind of peer advisory groups here in Pittsburgh. So it's almost
Hmm.
like a masterminding think tank, and I get together kind of business owners once a month, and we talk about kind of different topics. And we actually had one of those yesterday, so it's like really top of mind. We
Oh,
also
great.
we also bring in speakers, which I find amazing because like I have this kind of thirst for knowledge, and I'm like very curious. So I love to sharpen my saw, right? I need to stay on top of like best practices and new ideas and stretching my thinking. And the speaker we had yesterday spoke about um, flying in a V formation in your
Okay.
organization. So he's a Canadian speaker. His name is Warren Barry, and he talks about this V formation. And the one thing he kind of left with us was, when geese fly, and they're not ducks, because he corrected me, Canadian geese fly, they obviously fly in this V formation. But he said that the like leader will
Hmm.
fly slightly lower than the rest of the geese. And a lot
Mm.
of people think it's about kind of airflow and things like that. But he says that the way they flap their wings, it's actually about creating lift for the others.
Mm. Yeah.
And isn't it interesting? So, as a leader, I think it's very much about how do you lift your people. And I think a lot of
Mhm.
people know about servant leadership, and kind of that topic is something we know. But how are you creating lift? How are you putting people in the best place where they can thrive? How
Right.
do you remove resistance? As a leader, and I used to like run small teams. I did a lot of startups in my banking career, but I also led teams of like 400 or 500 people. So I've kind of seen the difference of how you need to adapt to people,
Yeah.
and how important it is to have alignment and making sure everyone's, kind of working towards the same mission. But that idea of
Mhm.
how do I remove resistance? How do I make your job easier? Sure, it's upskilling and it's supporting, but if there are roadblocks, let me remove them. So that idea of like putting people in a place to thrive and then removing resistance for me was actually a really powerful concept.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I do have that conversation often with young leaders, where they've seen something modeled, you know, this person or that person who was ahead of me did it this way. They were super stern. They kind of had a thumb on everything.
Mhm.
Um, and the conversation is more so about learning to grow by letting go a little bit.
Mm.
And for me, as I listen to some of my clients, we talk about the hiring practice. You know, are you bringing in people who are qualified for the position? Well, yeah, absolutely. We're bringing in people who are qualified. Are they the best possible candidate for that position that you've picked? Absolutely. Right. So why are you trying to do their job? There's trust that has to
Mm.
be, not necessarily earned, but if you're bringing them in, they've gone through this rigorous, hiring process. Let them spread their wings, and you can be more there to guide, like the lead goose.
Mhm.
You're
Mhm.
there to more guide than you are to, take their wings and flap them for them. So
Yeah.
that's that's a wonderful concept.
What the two things that you just said that really excite me. So the first one is we learn from everyone, right? So in
Yeah.
my journey, I've obviously worked with lots of different, when I was in my kind of career in the banking space, I had a lot of managers and leaders that I worked with. And I feel like, you learn from people that you really respect and admire, but there are also
Yeah.
people that you go, do you know what? That style didn't really work for me. And let me get
Right.
curious about what that was, right? So there was a
Mhm.
leader that I worked with really early in my career who would, kind of ask me to do something today. And then tomorrow I would go back showing her what I'd done. And she was like, that's not what we spoke about. And do you know what? Like as a young person, especially, you start doubting yourself, going, am I stupid? Like, did I not understand? What did I do wrong?
Yeah.
And I remember
Yeah.
eventually, like, yeah, I like taking notes, going, but we discussed this yesterday, right? And then she was like, no, you must have misunderstood. That's absolutely not what I wanted. And for me, then, like, my takeaway from that experience was, as a leader, I want to be consistent.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that I don't change my mind, because I'm someone who very much, if I get new information, I'll change and I'll adapt, right? So I know myself well enough that I know I'm adaptable and I'm okay with changing. But I know
Mhm.
not everyone around me is, right?
Yeah.
So I've learned
Yeah.
that when I change my mind, I go, hey, Eddie, I know yesterday I said we're going left. I really think we should consider going right. And this is why. This is what I've
Right.
learned. And then, we can kind of come along the journey. And I think often as leaders, we'll kind of change our mind, or we'll communicate something to our teams, but we forget that we've been thinking about this thing for days, weeks, months. And often
Mhm.
you'll kind of announce something to your team, just like bang, this is the decision. And I think it's hard for people because they haven't come on the journey, right? And
Yeah.
not your entire
Yeah.
organization can be privy to every conversation. That's not
Right.
practical. But I think that
Right.
idea of bringing people on the journey is so important. And, to come back to, we learn from everyone. So, everyone you're exposed to, like, just take little bits. This person is great because they really make an effort to get to know people. This
Yeah.
person really makes me passionate and powerful about the mission. This one's really great at this specific skill. I think it's like about, taking great things from different people and then making it your own, right? I will
Mhm.
never be exactly like you, even if I try. So why do
Right.
it? Like, almost like own who you are and own the authenticity, although you're taking from people that you've learned from over time.
Yeah. Yeah. It speaks to creating that type of culture. The communication aspect that you and I have talked about several times. It's one of the things that I know that you and I wanted to discuss was having those difficult communications, or
Mm.
difficult conversations,
Yeah.
and how people feel, how they respond to them. Um, but it starts, I believe, with almost exactly what you were saying in terms of being able to learn from others around you. One of
Mm.
the biggest mistakes that I think leaders make is letting people believe that they know everything about what's going on in their business. There's no way that you can know everything. The best practices for people who are answering the phones, the best practices for people who are, making the sales, the best practices
Yeah.
for marketing. If you're running the show, you can't be one of the people who are in everything. So
Yeah. And you
learning and
shouldn't be.
being,
Mhm.
yeah, you should not be if it's going to
Mhm.
be effective. But I think, leaders who I work with, there's a phrase that I start with, and it's very clear for every single person. And if they're unwilling to at least try it, then we're probably not a good match. But the theory is this: every leader has gotten to where they are by working their tails off, whether it's
Mhm.
through working your way up through, from the mailroom to the boardroom, or if you have, gone to 8 years of school, whatever it is that you've done, you have earned every bit of where you are right now. You've achieved a lot of things, but it's going to require about 10% of your ego in order for us to work well together, in order for us to make a change in your organization. That 10% can change everything: the way that you communicate with people, the way
Mm.
that people perceive you when you walk into a room. All of those things start from your willingness to kind of step down from the platforms that our ego can sometimes put us in. And that helps us in our communications. I think when we talk about um, the difficult conversations, I know that a lot of my people want to avoid them. Is that true for you as well?
I think most people want to avoid them from what I'm observed, and I think it's,
Yeah,
as we coming back to what I said in terms of the business grows as quickly as the leader is willing to grow.
yeah,
We need to like lean into these difficult things, and I mean, we all know that we've done it many times in our lives, but it will
yeah,
never become easy. The fact that you're growing means that there's a change happening. It's even like when you go to the gym, right? The muscle is kind of torn and gets stiff before it grows. Like there is this
yes,
kind of there's this work that needs to be done
hmm,
during a growth phase, and there'll always be some form of discomfort, right? And what's interesting is like earlier in your career, I think you assume that your leaders are good at everything. You think you've gotten to this point, as you said, right? You're at the boardroom now. You should have known how to do this by now. And that's
yeah,
not the case, right? I mean,
yeah,
every leader is still just a person and they typically struggle with the same things. Sure, they've
hmm,
maybe gone through it or learned through it over time, but I think certain things remain difficult for everyone.
yeah,
And I have these conversations frequently with my clients because many of them actually are just they want to be kind and they want to be nice to someone and often take people back that when you were ambitious young person who wanted to learn and improve, you probably wanted feedback. You probably wanted to know when you did things badly. I've often heard people say, I decided to let someone go, and the guy was like, why didn't you say something earlier? So it's
hmm,
you're giving someone a disservice by not having it. And I often say to my clients, when something happens, the moment to give them feedback is now. Like, don't
yes,
wait. I often get we're in a busy season, I'll do it next month or at the next like review or whatever. That's also unfair. And also, someone may actually have forgotten what happened, right? I mean,
hmm,
when people do that to me, I'm like, what are we talking about again? Like, I don't remember the situation because it wasn't a big deal to me. So
hmm,
I think it's just about almost like pushing yourself to be in that discomfort and just go, I'm
yeah,
learning from it, but it's such a like a people often say feedback is a gift, right? It's a gift. It's really,
yes,
I believe giving someone feedback is you showing that you're willing to A, be uncomfortable, and
hmm,
B, invest in that person. We
yeah,
know difficult conversations are uncomfortable, but the fact that
hmm,
I want to have the conversation with you means that I'm willing to be uncomfortable with you because I believe it's in your best interest.
yeah,
You will learn and you will grow, and so will the business benefit, right? So, I'm kind of I have those conversations frequently with my clients, and I just say, look, I feel like it's such an important skill that we need to hone and improve. And it gets
Yeah.
easier over time. I mean, it's never just, no one wants to tell someone they haven't done something well. But frequently I get the feedback, hey, that was actually not as bad as I thought it would be. You know?
Right. Right.
So I
Right.
think often the build up is so much worse than the actual moment.
It is worse because that goes to the stories we tell ourselves, you know? Um, when
Absolutely.
we get that very inkling that, the person that we're working with, whether it be a supervisor or a coworker, is upset with an outcome, we automatically go through and I've had this conversation with clients. They go through and they start to label all the things in their life that they've done wrong that have nothing to do with that moment. Where there was a misalignment, there was miscommunication, or project was off, just a little bit. But the thing that you said earlier is always a part of the conversation, and that is that clarity is the kindness that you need in that office. So um, I often encourage my clients to take a pause, answer these questions very quickly before you go into a conversation where you're having to tell somebody that they didn't live up to their expectations, and it's usually, what outcome do you want?
Mhm.
First off, when you're jumping in with this new, or not necessarily new, maybe someone's been there for years. Um, when you want a change, what is the outcome that you want? Um, Number two, what is the truth that I actually need to say? Do I need to bring up all these past issues, or can
Mhm.
we stick to this one little issue that we're dealing with right now? And then, what is the tone that you can take that preserves the dignity of that person? And so those are just the three questions that I ask them before you go in that room.
Mhm.
Take a breath. It takes 5 seconds. Ask yourself those three questions, and then the second part of it is really, I think it's hard for people in the moment where they're frustrated because something has happened, and this is more of a dysregulation issue than an emotional intelligence issue.
Mhm.
Take a minute, take that breath, and I encourage them to really try and separate the person from the behavior. The behavior that's being displayed, that needs to change. Does Bob or Sue actually have to change as a person?
Mm.
Most often, no. It's around this issue or that topic. Um,
Mm.
but it helps the to build the trust. Number one, between you and that coworker or client. Um, but it also takes the temperature down a little bit, because I guarantee you there's not one person who's listening to this podcast right now who hasn't, messed up at work, and they're all already beating themselves up,
Yeah.
before the conversation's even had.
Mhm. And look, I often also think that, we so easily see giving feedback as this big event, right? So I guess
Hmm.
usually the worst one is at the annual performance review where you go, you did all these things and the person wasn't aware. We want to try
Hmm.
and avoid those. But I like to see feedback as an ongoing conversation because I think it
Yeah.
then becomes easier. Let's frequently
Hmm.
have a conversation. I and one team even did we had like a Friday feedback, and we would each have a conversation, your win for the week and what you can improve. And it was just almost to kind of build that muscle of giving feedback. It doesn't have to be this thing that we all have to get anxious about. It's almost like we're
Right.
practicing, right? And by it being so frequently, it often was like small things, but it was us practicing, the having the conversation and celebrating something, but then also helping people improve just at small tweaks that actually they all compound over time, right? So I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
having this almost ongoing feedback loop makes it more easy. It's more casual. It's like ongoing conversations, right? And I think then people actually start enjoying it and they go, hey, how did this one go? And did I improve here? And I think if we can get to that point as you
Yeah.
say, with trust and building relationships, if it's this ongoing thing of, I know by helping you, we are getting better as a collective, then it's in
Hmm.
everyone's interest to want to help each other improve.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with that 100%. I mean, imagine the only time that you really talk to your supervisor or boss is when something is wrong.
Yeah,
Imagine
exactly.
imagine, like, every time that person comes around the corner, it's like, "Oh my gosh, what
Oh
have I done
no.
now?" You know what I mean? It helps to build the rapport, and it's not, um it ends up not being a situation where you are afraid to even let them know, "Oh, I missed this thing, or I messed up on this thing, or I didn't understand what we were talking about in the meeting."
Mm,
Now you have trust, you have rapport, you have the
mm.
ability to check in, and it's not just about punishment. It's not just about, um, being made an example of.
Yeah.
Um, that's so, gosh, yeah. The consistency is huge.
Mm. And it's again, like, I care enough about you to give you that feedback. So in my career, I've been blessed with like a lot of incredible mentors along the way.
Hmm.
And like towards the end of my kind of time in South Africa, I had like 5 people that I respected immensely that I would often like bounce
Hmm.
things off of. And I remember I
Yeah.
had to have like a quite a difficult conversation with one of our board members. And I remember saying to him, like, I feel like I'm wasting her time, but I want to have this conversation. I'm not sure what I should do. And he was like, Elise, you need to get over it. Like, go and set up that meeting and go and have a
Hmm.
conversation. And
Hmm.
I remember at the time I was like, did you not just hear the whole 10-minute spiel I gave you? But I actually started laughing because I said, I'm so glad you disrupted that thought pattern. It was just kind of like, stop, you know.
Yeah.
And I remember
Yeah.
walking away from that thinking, man, that's exactly what I needed. so
Hmm.
so sometimes it's just people going, get out of your own head, like stop doing that or whatever, right? The people that are willing
Yeah.
to tell you something that sometimes you don't actually want to hear, but they know it's in your best interest. And because you've got a good relationship with them, you're actually so grateful for it. I remember phoning him
Yeah.
a day or two later going, I'm so glad you did that. Thank you so much. Like at the time, it actually felt quite harsh, but that's exactly what I needed.
Yeah. Yeah. I love when leaders do that, that just, they're not worried about the title, the accolades and all that. There's this group that I worked with a few years back, and I talked to the C-suite, about just the culture. Um, they feel as if they were giving off a open door. You can talk to us about anything policy, but that wasn't what they felt. And so we worked through a series of conversations about what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing from people who work for you. And they went and took my advice and went 40 steps above. And I was floored. I came back 6 months later just to have the conversation. And these these guys would go down to different departments and bring donuts and just talk to people. Hey, take 5 minutes from the phones, take 5 minutes from whatever it is you're doing.
Mhm.
And they talked about, sports, how their kids were doing, getting to know, their lives as individuals. And then one, because they had started doing this so often, just to different departments each week, they got to know that donuts weren't really what this department wanted. They love, fresh fruits
Yeah.
and vegetables. So literally
Yeah.
they came down with hummus and veggies, and so the outcome from that, and it was insane, the ability for them to come down to everyone else's level mentally and understand that these are human beings who
Mhm.
have lives that are going on outside the door of this office
Yeah.
that need to be tended to as well. They saw some really cool things over the next couple of years, and retention was higher. People who communicated work-life balance higher. Their desire to grow in the organization as opposed to just do their job
Yep.
higher. All of these things were all because the leadership, who thought they were doing a decent job, said, "You know what? What does it mean to take literally 30 extra minutes out of our week to do this little thing?" it changed the outcomes for them completely.
I love that you had that conversation with them.
Yeah.
Congratulations. What an
Thank
incredible
you.
outcome. That reminds me of like the concept of intention versus impact. And that's
Mm,
something I learned quite early in my kind of leadership journey, because I think often people intend for, to have this open door policy, as you spoke about, and you intend to
mhm,
land a message well, but the impact of how people receive it is
mhm.
can easily be different. And I think, it's so
Yeah.
important to actually be in touch enough to kind of know when you need to pivot or adapt or change your kind of messaging so that it lands with people and that your
Yeah.
intention and the impact are aligned.
Yeah.
The other thing you said about people willing to work harder, that kind of concept of people giving their discretionary energy, not the
Mhm.
9 to 5 that I have to, because I know a lot of people that'll kind of wait for the second and then leave, which makes me really sad that people, feel like that about their work. But if
Mm.
they're engaged, if they're excited, if they're motivated, if they're aligned with the mission and the purpose, that's when people are okay with working after hours or catching up on weekends or having a team call at night when there's something going live tomorrow morning. That's
Yeah.
what you want. You want people to care enough about what they do so
Mhm.
they're okay with that. And it's not like I feel like people should work all the time, but it's when it matters, people are willing to go above and beyond. And I think it's that culture that you build during the year, it's that one time that you need people to really make it happen, that they're willing
Yeah.
to do it because you invested in them over time, right? The hummus or the donuts,
Yeah.
those things built up to that moment when you really needed it. It's like you were
Yeah.
investing in it over time. And that one time you needed to kind of, take out that money that you were saving over time for this kind of once off.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a lot of I wouldn't say controversy. There's a lot of conflicting opinions about executive presence and how if you know lean in too much to the company and try to build this family like culture, that it can lead to enmeshment where it's too entangled. And I have had this conversation with at least, gosh, I'd say over the last 3 or 4 years, I've had it with at least 5 or 6 of my clients who have said, I feel like if I keep doing this, then it's going to lead towards a negative outcome that we don't want. Where people feel like, well, Bob understands that my kid's got a baseball game today, so I'll just sneak out a little early. Like they just start getting those little bitty deals. Has that been like true for any of your clients who are trying to connect better with their staff?
I haven't often come across that, but I think that's very much. You were talking about clarity earlier, right? And
Hmm.
communication. I think if people understand what their expectations are, then
Yeah.
you can almost give them flexibility around it, right? So I kind of feel that people need to know exactly what expectations are, what you're expecting of them. So they need a lot of kind of clarity in what that expectation is of them and their role. And then I
Yeah.
feel like around that there should be flexibility. I think
Yeah.
people appreciate, and just in general, flexibility of time, but also the trust, the giving me space to maneuver, let me do what I'm good at. As you were saying, don't hire me if you don't think I can do the job. So I almost feel
Yeah.
like once you have that clarity and like, where are we going and what am I expecting of you, then we can give people flexibility around that. And I think that builds so much trust and people willing to go further because you've given them that flexibility.
Don't go anywhere. The Unbroken Place will be back in just a moment. What if the clarity you've been searching for isn't out there, but already within you? I'm Eddie Paul Thomas, life and leadership coach. I work with purpose-driven people who are ready to lead boldly, live intentionally, and grow from the inside out. Whether you're at a crossroads or leveling up, coaching can help you move with focus, confidence, and wisdom. This is your time. Visit onsecondthoughtstudio.com to get started. Revitalize your brand and accelerate your impact with Eddie and Erica at Elevate One Consulting. Experts in organizational development, digital marketing, and much more. From leadership coaching to creating unforgettable digital experiences, we've got you covered. Visit elevateoneconsulting.com today. Elevate One Consulting. Innovate, grow, elevate.
Looking for a way to reconnect and reset? Awaken Pittsburgh offers free guided meditations open to everyone, online and in person, on the first and third Wednesday, second Saturday, and third Monday of each month. Each session includes guided practice, reflection, and space for questions and support. No experience needed. Sign up on Eventbrite and join the community.
Imagine a place where the untold stories of Black missionaries are amplified, honored, and celebrated. A place that bridges the legacy of the people of the Way with the powerful missions work of today's African diaspora. Welcome to the Black Missions Museum, a digital project dedicated to preserving the voices, culture, and legacy of Black missionaries across the globe. But we need your help to bring this vision to life. Your support makes a difference. Join us in this mission by donating today. Just click the link in the show notes to give and be a part of history. Together, we can inspire future generations and keep the legacy alive. And we're back. I think one of the cool outcomes that I've seen was have you heard of the theory of multiple intelligences, where individuals? Well, let me break it down for our listeners here. So, I had read and learned about a few different things in terms of how people's minds work, where people are gifted it's in certain areas
Mhm.
but may be terrible in others. So
Yeah.
you would want somebody who's gifted in medicine. You want that person doing your brain surgery. You wouldn't necessarily want a lawyer trying trying to do brain surgery, or a doctor to try and defend you in court. But they're both geniuses on a different level. And the same thing goes with someone who may be your mechanic. Again, you don't want a doctor trying to fix your car. You want the mechanic to fix your car because that's where their gifting is. And so I say all that to kind of lean into a really cool discussion I had last year, because they started to engage with their teams on a more personal level, and having conversations, building the trust, building the rapport. They started to notice that some individuals who were in one role were really more gifted in another role.
Mm.
They had those conversations, and when it came time to fill this role, we already had that in house, because I had
Yeah.
had the conversations with those individuals and different departments, and we were able to make that transition. But that was one of the coolest things, again, just to kind of go back
Yeah.
to our leaders having those conversations, and being more involved, and understanding, yes, the bottom line is important, but the people who work for you are not just cogs in a wheel. They're not just
Yep.
tools that are there to be utilized. They're
Mm.
people with skills and talents and dreams, and the more you invest in them, the more you're going to get out of it.
Mm. And I think having the right person in the right seat is actually such a big kind of part of our leadership of what
Yeah.
we need to do, right? Like I
Yes.
think it's our job to, you know, bring people on and help them be successful, but then also acknowledge exactly what you were saying. What are their zones of genius? Like, where can I put you so that you can thrive? People often talk about, like, you could have a plant here, but if it doesn't get any sun, it's going to wilt and die. But just move it
Yeah.
slightly closer to the window and it kind of thrives, right? And I think
Yeah.
so easily we think this person is not good at their job, but maybe it's not the person, maybe it's the expectation of the job, or maybe it's just altogether the wrong role. So, having the right person in the right seat is so important from a skills perspective. It's
Yeah.
important to have people's alignment from a values perspective as well. But I think that job fit is so important.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we're leaning in almost into one of your areas of expertise with team alignment. I'm just curious,
Yeah.
what are some early warning signs that a team might be drifting out of alignment for you?
Whew. Alignment is such a important topic. I feel like you almost can't over communicate if it when it comes to a business. And I think so frequently, actually any relationship really, so often we think we've said something once and it's kind of like we're good, right? Like we're on the same page. But
Yeah.
it's even like in a
Yeah.
marriage. I told you when we got married, I love you. So you got it right. I don't have to tell you again. My
Right.
aunt actually said that. Her and my uncle were like that. They were very sweet and they had a very happy relationship. But I don't think many relationships are like that. I think it's important to keep communicating. And
Yeah.
people need to understand the vision, where you're going, what your expectations are, and very much what is my role in this? How do I contribute to the bigger picture? We
Yeah.
easily think that people understand that part just because of kind of the conversations we have, but I don't think they always do.
Mm.
So keep helping people understand like what you do matters. Like this part of what you do in the kind of bigger picture is really important to the total success. And I feel like when people's heart is in it, when they feel like what they do matters, you know,
Hmm.
everything comes together. So when I was running a banking team, at one stage, I was primarily in commercial banking, but I was running our private banking division for a while. And I remember saying to our teams, like, it's not about like delivering the credit card to the client. Like, that's not what you do. You're having a conversation with someone about their financial future. It's not
Yeah.
about writing a mortgage. It's about keeping my family safe, creating a legacy, having a safe space for my child, creating that environment for them to feel safe in a happy home. That's what matters. But again, that is so much about perspective, right? And I think
Yeah.
helping our teams see that bigger picture is so important. I think it's very much the role of the leader because
Yeah.
like your team can so easily get stuck in the detail of the everyday thing that they do. And
Hmm.
they can easily kind of, lose perspective of how kind of it builds into the bigger picture. And I think then easily they feel like, does it matter? Do I really contribute? And then when you kind of pull people out and go, do you realize that this is helping someone build a legacy and helping them take care of their family, that like touches you. Like that is
Yeah.
meaningful stuff, right? And I
Yeah.
think, all of those things, when people acknowledge what they do matters, when everyone in the team acknowledges that, and when we acknowledge that we need one another to be successful. No one person is going to make this thing happen. The great salesperson is amazing. But if you don't fulfill the thing, if the product is not of a good quality, if the
Hmm.
finance operations team don't do their part, the thing falls apart, right? So it's not just the
Yeah.
one guy in the whole chain that's important. It's
Hmm.
everyone. And I think when we
Yeah.
all start acknowledging everyone else's part they play, that's when everyone's like, hey, we're doing this thing together. And we start celebrating one another's success.
Yeah. Gosh, that's such a great point, Elise. It's um so much of my career has been not just in the office working on whatever the project is or whatever the team was, but also as a high school coach and college basketball coach.
Yeah, amazing.
And we talk often, and I know that a lot of people are going to kill me on social media for this, but we talk often about Michael Jordan, who many consider the greatest basketball player ever. You can
Yeah.
argue whoever you want. It's whoever they are, that's fine. But
Yeah.
I like his example because Michael Jordan by himself was spectacular. The man averaged 30 points per game and did all these amazing things on the court. He had all the commercials, had all this thing going on,
Mhm.
but he could never get over the top. He could never win championships. And it was kind of the knock on him. Yeah, he's an amazing athlete. He can do all these great things, but he's never going to win a championship. And it took a coach who came in and told him, you need to start trusting your teammates
Mm.
for him to get over the top. And so he started passing more. He started, instead of always being the guy that take the shot at the end of the game, he would draw the attention of the defense and give it to his teammate, and he learned that. Now, he was still very, very dedicated, and from his teammates, he was hard to kind of get around because he was so competitive. But it was because he let go of 10% of that ego, as we were talking about before, to recognize that other mates are needed. I need them to succeed to get to
Mhm.
where I want to go, and that's often what you look at when you have the customer service rep versus sales,
Yeah.
or any other marketing versus this department or that, and having those conversations about the systems. Like, look, we're all needed.
Hmm.
We are all needed. Otherwise, there's no way we're going to get to where we want to go. If you want this organization to grow, if you want a bigger paycheck, if you want more security, you have to treat your top salesperson just as well as you do the person who opens the front door for people every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love
Um,
your kind of analogy with sport, because I think sport is such a great comparison to, I
mhm,
guess, life in general and leadership. And my son enjoys basketball as well, and we were watching,
mhm,
some of the Michael Jordan documentary, and there are like a whole bunch of others as well. But one thing I also
yeah.
really enjoyed is, I guess, firstly, he kind of trained harder than everyone else. He seemed to be there before, the team practice and afterwards. And I actually got him one of that poster that where his quote, I failed over and over again, and that's why I succeed. I love
Hmm.
that, because I think so easily people in general give up too quickly, right? And you have to
Yeah.
go through the learning curve and the difficult things to get better. But he also seemed to push his teammates really hard, right? So, he
Mhm.
acknowledged that he couldn't win by himself, but like, for us to win, I need you to be better as well. So I can't only train harder. I need everyone
Mhm.
to kind of, rise and kind of lift their game. And I think that's actually a great concept, right? Where we hold one another accountable as a
Yeah.
team, because so easily we
Yeah.
go, oh, well, the boss is the one kind of managing everyone. But I feel like you want to get to a space where peers hold each other accountable. Like, hey, Eddie, you didn't like make that deadline. You're letting me down because I need to go and speak to the client today, and now I'm not prepared. Like those conversations I think are good, because it's like we all have expectations of one another. We are reliant
Mhm.
on one another, and we're not
Yeah.
letting anyone let the team down. I think that's actually quite a powerful concept. When teams can get to that point, I think it's really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's that communication, depending on the style anyway, can be helpful in terms of helping us deal with a problem before it becomes a problem.
Mhm.
It's sometimes when your example, when the person wasn't able to get the thing done before the deadline, sometimes that's has literally nothing to do with them. They're waiting on something from someone else, and there's a whole system sometimes
Sure.
at play. But communicating early and often about those things, as opposed to just saying, Elise, I need you to do A, B, and C, and I need it done by Friday. Well, okay, well, let's talk about what it takes before you just assign it to me. Let's talk about the steps it's going to take to get those things done. How do we
Mm.
prioritize this project versus this project? There's a lot that leaders can do to kind of set the table
Mm.
before we're in front of the outward facing phase
Sure.
of the product or project. So
Mm.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, and it kind of leads into another area in which I know is your area of expertise. I work on it with entrepreneurs, but you're at a much larger scale, and it's scaling business to sustainability.
Yeah.
And I had a really good question for you, and I'm going to catch you a little bit off guard with this one because I didn't send it earlier, but I was thinking about it before our
Okay.
conversation. A lot of people want to scale quickly. A lot.
Mhm.
When they come out with a great idea or great product, they want to scale quickly. but what does sustainable scaling actually look like in practice?
Yeah. I think some people can easily scale themselves out of business, right? Some people just want to grow so quickly and they want cash flow and they want sales, and then all the back office stuff and all the other people we just spoke about like cannot keep up. But I think the kind of ultimate thing of scaling, and there's a great book, The Science of Scaling, Dr. Benjamin Hardy, and he writes a lot about focus, right? So he talks about so many people just want to do more.
Yeah.
There's a new revenue stream and there's more of this and there's more of that. But frequently, when you're scaling, you actually need to kind of go down to the bones of it and go, what is actually making us successful? And,
Hmm.
often that 80/20 principle like applies. What is making us successful and how can we really focus on that? How can we put the
Yeah.
magnifying glass on that and remove the rest, right? And I think people really find that difficult, because often as entrepreneurs, especially people with a very entrepreneurial spirit, love new opportunities. They love new things.
Hmm.
And, like they see opportunities everywhere. But if you're trying to do 5 things at once, you're unlikely going to be super successful at all of them at the same time. So,
Hmm.
how are you prioritizing? What's important now? It's not like you won't ever do them, but what is taking your focus right now, and how are you building that to sustainability?
Yeah.
And then it's
Yeah.
about like, how am I building the system so it can handle the load, right? If you just kind of
Hmm.
throw more sales, if you start advertising
Yeah.
more and have more salespeople, that's amazing. But if you
Hmm.
can't implement and execute effectively, you've
Yeah.
actually just caused a problem, because now there's no trust. The clients are upset. They're not getting a good experience, and the whole thing folds. So I think it's about kind of creating this almost like an idea of like a platform. Where am
Hmm.
I creating scale in the operations so that it can handle the load? So that when I
Yeah.
start kind of adding more sales and kind of, more territories and kind of, really kind of focusing on growing this business,
Hmm.
um, that it can handle it. Because so easily people just think, throw more at this thing, and then it all kind of crumbles. So I feel like, getting that focus. There's also a concept of lifting your floor. Is like, what are your expectations of your team, of your
Hmm.
product, even maybe your pricing? Like, what am I, what am I doing? How am I serving my clients? What is really important to us? So again, I think that focus and clarity is so important. And then
Yeah.
making sure you build out like the systems and the processes that can handle the load. I've often seen that, and I've seen that like, firsthand in a new product I launched a couple of years back. We're like, oh, it's great, and it's so exciting and whatever. And then it works for the first couple of clients, and there's a little bit of sticky tape here, and there's a little bit of manual
Hmm.
stuff there, and then there's like hundreds of clients, and then your sticky tape and things fall apart, right? So
Yeah.
you can't just kind of you know make those things kind of those all those like weak points really get exposed when you start scaling. And I think it's about being intentional about when you're ready for it, and having a phased approach just to make sure that you're fixing yourself and getting things ready for the scale, so that when that load really does increase, that the system can handle it.
Yeah. Yeah. I second everything that you just said. I had a number of individuals, just personal experience, and then with clients, one that grew very quickly. They had a very, very popular product that the plan before they launched and got it out there was, we're going to do A, B, and C. We're, their phrase that they said in staff in house, we're going to keep the main thing the main thing. That was what they said. Okay,
Nice.
great. So they were
Yeah.
going to do A, B, and C. They launched the product. It was so popular that so many more people than they could have even imagined wanted to be a part of this thing that they were building. And so all of a sudden, the A, B, and C became DEFJK, all it
Yeah.
became all these things that they wanted to do to meet the needs of the people who were interested. And I said, you're still building infrastructure right now.
Yeah.
Slow down. Let
Hmm.
people know that that's something you want to do in 2027 or 2028. But we're honing this, and clients don't always take your word or your advice.
Yep.
And they learned that
Hmm.
one of the first things that break when the growth of the organization is growing larger than it's ready to be built is
Hmm.
trust. It's trust. Okay, well, I thought you guys were going to do this and this. Well, we need a few more months to do this thing. Well, I thought you were going to do this and that. Well, we don't actually have staff to do that and that.
Yeah.
Like, all of these things started to kind of crumble, and they had to back up and say, okay, hold on, let's recalibrate. Let's
Mm.
start back from square and do the thing that made everyone happy. Let's focus on doing that really, really well, and plan for A, B, C, and D, as opposed to just doing the thing that made everyone happy. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, you do this, now let's do that. Well, we'll get there. We'll get
Or
there.
often a client will be like, "Can you do this?" And they're like, "Sure, we'll figure it out." And can you do that? We, yeah, like I think a lot of entrepreneurs want to say yes. That's how they've
Yeah.
built their business. They're like, "I'm going to say yes, and then I'll kind of just go in the back and quickly figure out how we're going to execute in this." And I think the intentions are so good. But again, as you
Hmm.
say, once you scale, all those weaknesses are exposed. And
Yeah.
sometimes you're actually just doing everyone a huge service by saying, the main thing is the main thing, and that's what we're good at. We may get to
Yeah.
something else later, or I could refer you elsewhere, but let me rather do that thing really well. Um, and obviously, around all of this is also having the right people in your business. That I think that you know
Hmm.
when you're wanting to grow quickly. Back in the day when the business was small, you were able to fulfill many roles and you were doing many things in the business. And that's
Yeah.
not going to be sufficient when you're growing, right? And
Right.
and then also as the business grows, again, the business requires something different of you as the leader. So you're not the accountant and the salesperson and the CEO and kind of doing ops in the background as well.
Right.
You know, when you're getting bigger, what am I thinking? What is the strategy? What partnerships am I creating? Where am I really adding value? And where am I best placed? What is my unique skill set that I can bring to the table? And there are other people that are likely better at certain things than me. And let me surround myself with these incredible people for us to be successful. And that's quite a
Yeah.
mind shift. I think a lot of people get stuck in I can do it in 10 minutes, I'll just do it myself. And
Yeah.
and that's not actually the point, right? Because a lot of my
Hmm.
clients, and many of them, their businesses are like 30, 50 million revenue. Like these are big businesses, right? And they still battle with letting things go. One of my clients yesterday was saying, like, they still do their own scheduling. Like,
Mm.
why am I talking to you about when we're next meeting? Yeah, we've kind of scheduled in advance, but often she'll be handling her own schedule. And I'm just like, you shouldn't be doing that. And I know that potentially just setting something up will be quick, but that's not the point. The point is you need to be focused.
Right.
And also, a lot of research has been done that for you to kind of shift from one task to another, it takes you like I think there's something like 20 minutes for you to focus again on what you were doing. So you
Yeah.
want to have efficiency in what you're doing. The business needs very specific things from you as a leader. Focus on that and get other people to do the other tasks. And again, do things that you're good at and that energizes you and that brings value to the business. Lots of people
Right.
still hold on to tasks that they really don't like. And look, I
Mm.
think I think in any role, we all have things we enjoy more than others. Like in
Yeah.
everything. You won't always love 100% of everything you do every day. I think that's just
Hmm.
practical. But there are certain things that really drain you. And I think you need to be self-aware enough to go, I could do this scheduling myself. I really don't enjoy it. I feel like it's not a good use of my time. I'm choosing
Yeah.
not to do it. And some people are really good at that. They're amazingly detail oriented. They thrive at that. let them thrive and then let you focus.
Yeah. Yeah. That brings to mind kind of the opposite side of that coin too. There are those who really enjoy building and solving problems, like they did in the very beginning, but now they're in the C-suite.
Yeah.
Um, and the challenge that I issued to them was not trying to get back there so often so that you can get that feeling again, but maybe once a month you make some time and connect with that department and say, hey, I'm coming down and I'd love to do this for an hour with the team just to be a part of the
Yeah.
team.
Be
There
fun.
was a guy at a university that I was speaking to who loved recruiting, but he was at a much much
Yeah.
higher level running the university. I said, you know what? Be a recruiter for a day. Be a recruiter for a half day, once a month. Get that, scratch that itch, and then get back to your job. And he
Yeah.
tried it. He loved it. It was and it. To be honest, the recruiters got a kick out of it.
I'm sure.
Just kind of
Yeah.
having someone with that stature come down and do the recruiting gig. So, yeah, I think there's an opportunity for that, but also recognizing, your talents and skills now that you are in this major leadership position are needed elsewhere.
Mm.
So um, that would be a good focus for people. Just as it grows, your role's going to change. Your role is definitely going to change.
Mm.
So, Elise, I would say there's so many things that you and I could offer to people in terms of how to scale, how to communicate better in the workplace, maybe even with personal relationships outside of the office
Mhm.
that people could go with. But if you were to leave our listeners with just one thing to consider as we're wrapping up here, what would it be?
So I think for us to be successful in anything, we need to be self aware. So I think
Mm,
taking the time to actually understand what lights you up, like what gives you energy, where are you best placed to add value to a team, an organization, to a relationship. I think everything starts with that self awareness and
yeah.
taking the time to actually just almost getting to know yourself, right?
Mm,
Take 10 minutes in the morning, sit quietly, write some gratitude, journal a little bit. I think just creating that space to think is
mm,
so important. I think so easily we live such fast paced lives that everything almost just happens to us. And I think almost like taking that moment for yourself, acknowledging that you deserve that time. Like people talk about self care, right? Just taking that moment
yeah.
for yourself and just, thinking about what's important to you and what you want to do and where you want to go, and what lights you up, what makes you happy. I think that's really important. And I think then also staying curious, I think is a really
Mm,
important theme for
yes.
me, like in so many things and actually in everything we were speaking about today. So easily people jump to conclusions in various parts of our lives and in almost many situations, right? But I think it's if you can come to a situation with curiosity, with wanting to know, whether it's you responding badly to a situation, going, I wonder what triggered that. Like, I wonder what caused that. Or you having to give feedback and just staying curious about, like, where is the person? Where are they at? What support do they need? Let me
Yeah.
understand how we can help them better. I think those two themes for me are almost like universal, and are so
Mhm.
important in every part of our lives.
Yeah. Words of wisdom. I'll stick more so with your first one. One of the things that I love to tell my people to do is check in with themselves, and we use the same terminology that you use for any business. It's a SWOT analysis. What are
Hmm.
your in this moment today? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What are your opportunities? What are your threats? And being able to be honest with yourself about where you are in a moment during that day just give you so much clarity and helps the communications that you have with others throughout that day, whether it be personal or in business. just kind of knowing where you are. It's a really powerful tool.
I could keep talking about that forever, but just one thought that came up is often when we create space to think, like that's when we have our best ideas, right? I think that's when you allow yourself to be
Yes.
intuitive and creative. And so often, again, we're so busy that we're doing and we're not thinking. We're not actually spending time thinking. And I often think about, I was launching a new kind of business unit in South Africa, and it was during COVID. And I was really like thinking through, like, how do I launch this new thing? And I can't get to clients, and we can't have events, and we can't do it the way we used to. And I really, enjoy cycling. And I remember going for like a 4-hour ride with my husband. And I remember stopping after that going, I know exactly what I need to do. And it wasn't like I was thinking about on the ride, but I think it's just that moment of zoning out, you're fresh air, you're in the sunshine, like there's just actually getting yourself out of the almost like the pressure of problem solving. That's when your brain does what it's good at. It figures it out and you come up with great ideas. So yeah, whenever you're stuck, like just take a moment, go and walk around, just do something completely different. And often that's exactly what you needed to solve that problem.
Outstanding. Well, Elize, where can people find your work with the Changemakers?
Yeah, so my website is thechangemakers.co. And I'm mostly active on LinkedIn, so you'll find me under Elize Giese. I like to post my thoughts and things I'm learning and just kind of my journey of learning and growing alongside the people I work with.
Yeah, outstanding. Well, thank you so much for being a part of this today. I know our audience is going to take a lot from this. Guys, all of her connection information will be in the show notes. Thank you for joining us. The Unbroken Place podcast is presented by Eddie Paul Thomas, LLC, and sponsored by Elevate One Consulting and OK on Second Thought Coaching. The show is produced by Say Something Studios. Learn more about our sponsors and producer in the show notes. The show's music is performed by Kesta. Thank you for being a part of the Unbroken Place podcast community. Look for an ongoing conversation on TikTok, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. And make sure to sign up for our newsletter called Things I'm Rethinking at eddiepaulthomas.com. Until next time, one love.